Good afternoon and welcome to Getting Through the Cracks 2. Can everybody hear me? I need a sign from somewhere. Perhaps Natasha, our guest. Can you hear me? Lovely. And also welcome to those of you who might be catching up online afterwards as well. My name is Louise Katerega and I'm your host, and you will also be able to see Natasha Gilmour, our guest today. I'll tell you lots about the pair of us and the context we're in at the moment, but let's do the housekeeping first. So, please use the chat freely. Do introduce yourselves, swap emails, connections, etc., etc. You can put questions in the chat, but we are using the Q&A that you'll see at the bottom of your screen, right in the middle. For me, it's just to the left of the chat for your questions. And we're encouraging you to put them in at any time. We'll be filtering them and sorting them out. So don't feel you have to wait until after Natasha has spoken and shown her films. As soon as it pops into your head, pop it into the Q&A, and Pilar, Nikki and Theatre Alibi will be sorting them out in the background. We also, other bits of housekeeping. I think that's it really. It's just to say that that Getting Through the Cracks is part of a series. I'll be talking more about what the next events are, but do check out Theatre Alibi's website to find out more that are happening in this series, and I'll be hosting some more too. So let's move on to the biogs, and we'll go from the outside to the inside. So from Getting Through the Cracks to Theatre Alibi to myself, and then on to Natasha. So what is Getting Through the Cracks? It's a webinar series, especially for performance makers for young audiences. Since 2020, Theatre Alibi have been hosting hour-long conversations with internationally renowned performance makers for young audiences who have been sharing a behind-the-scenes look at their process, giving an insight into how and why they create their work. Who are Theatre Alibi? Theatre Alibi are based in Devon in the southwest of England. For nearly 40 years, they have been creating work with and for people of all ages, performing in all sorts of places, from theatres to village halls, libraries, and on the streets. Each year, the company tours extensively to primary schools, reaching around 12,000 children. And for many of those children, an Alibi show will be their first experience of theatre. The thread that runs through all the Theatre Alibi's work is story, and the belief that a good story, beautifully told, can help us get a precious handle on the chaotic world. I think that's very true of today and the piece that we're talking about, as you'll see. In recent years, Theatre Alibi have been the subject of a PhD study looking at the impact of live performance on children, and that work led to this series of talks coming into existence. So who am I? Where do I fit into this picture? As I said, my name is Louise Katerega. My pronouns are she, her. I would describe myself as mixed Ugandan and English heritage, but I have some Welsh roots, which is reflected if you could see me, or if you can't see me, in my Celtic earrings and cross that I'm wearing. So I have countryside roots as well, which really resonated in the piece that we're about to see. I have brown skin, which is quite shiny today, blonde hair, which is dyed, and you can see a few roots creeping through. And the background behind me is my favorite color, purple. My pathway here today has been paved with dance, and it's like a kind of crazy paving of many roles in dance: performer, teacher, choreographer, maker. I come from participatory and community, like Natasha, share lots of values, but have also made professional work. We also share an interest and values around supporting and promoting work by, for and with disabled artists. We are both parents. I'm parents of 2, Natasha is parents of 3, as you'd see, same-ish age children. And I'm also on the board of Assetage UK and Performing Arts for Young People England. And the area that I'm now working in is communications. I've been part pulled in and part embraced, like many people out there, what's been happening with equity, inclusion and diversity, particularly over the past 2 years. And my main role now is as creative producer for change at People Dancing, another organisation you can look up, but we are the flagship membership organisation for community dancers in the UK, which means we're the professionals who look after the professionals who look after all the non-professionals. And I'm delighted to say I've encountered Natasha's work at our conferences, where I joined in a beautiful workshop that she led for asylum seekers, refugees and newly arrived people, where we sampled dance from around the world and blended it all together, and saw a version of one of her cross-generational works, which has stuck in my mind forever. So I'm delighted to be here today and introducing Natasha. So I'll give you Natasha's biog, and then Natasha is going to talk, show a little bit of film, talk some more, show another little bit of film, and then it will be over to us for our Q&A. So Natasha Gilmour. Natasha is artistic director and founder of Barrowland Ballet, an internationally respected choreographer for dance, theatre and film. Natasha's work has toured to 6 continents. In 2017, Natasha was the UK nomination for the Assetage Award for Excellence for her work for young audiences, including Little Red, Whiteout, Tiger Tail and Poggle. Natasha is passionate about creating intergenerational, large-scale participation performances. In 2016, she established the award-winning intergenerational company Wolfpack, which works with works such as Wolves, incorporating a 60-strong intergenerational cast aged between 4 to 85 years old. This year, her most recent work, the one that we're looking at today, Family Portrait, won the Bobby Award for the Best of the Fest at Edinburgh Fringe Festival. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Natasha, who's going to talk and screen share. Welcome, Natasha.
Thanks so much, Louise. Yeah, great, thank you. So it's brilliant to be here this afternoon. I can tell you a little bit more about me. So I am a director, a choreographer and a dance artist, just about, having come back to dance after a break of about 10 years. I'm a middle-aged white woman with long hair and a fringe, and I founded the company Barrowland Ballet over 10 years ago. Despite the name, we're actually a contemporary dance company, and we're making work that's theatrical, touring across the world to small and middle-scale theatres, and we're especially known for our work for children and young people. My practice is inspired by working with intergenerational casts, like you just heard, and making work with children with complex needs, also for neurodiverse audiences, parenthood and working in the arts, and working with asylum seekers and refugees. I would say that my work really falls into 2 main categories. There's the story-led, very linear work, such as Tiger Tail, or the works that are more autobiographical, and these tend to be a bit more thematically led with sort of multiple miniature stories within them, and they're more open to interpretation. And these include Whiteout, which is inspired by my experience as a white European married to a Black African and the mother of biracial children. Or more recently, the work we're talking about today, Family Portrait, which is a piece that I made during lockdown. It's an interactive video installation piece, and the audience sit inside 4 screens on swivel stools. And there's a playfulness, the way that we've put the piece together in terms of the edit across these 4 screens, and the chance for the audience to do their own edit, as they watch. And this creates a kind of improvised, seated choreography of their own as they follow all the action. Family Portrait takes you on a journey through rural Scottish landscapes where you encounter a family, my family. and a series of narratives unfold. And it's choreographed with my 3 children. So we were able to work in a very intimate way, because obviously we know each other very well. And this really influenced the kind of dynamic and the content of all our duets and our movement. I think it captures a very honest and intimate portrayal of family life. And this is done through choreographed sequences, but also more candid moments as we interact with each other and with the landscape around us. So what I'll do, I'll show you a trailer, which will basically do a lot of the talking for me and help explain, you know, much of what the work is about. So the background to Family Portrait is that basically in 2020, I had planned to take my children out of school for the full academic year because they were going to join me on a world tour. I planned to work with local artists in different places around the world to create this video installation work, Family Portrait. But I decided to start in the Scottish Highlands with Robbie Singh to do a week of research and development to establish a concise remit for other artists in order to make it a cohesive piece. And so Robbie is a brilliant artist. He's a choreographer, a filmmaker, an editor, and with his knowledge of the local area in the Highlands, he was just the perfect collaborator for us. And yeah, I was really keen to connect initially with artists around the world who have an intergenerational or a dance for camera practice, but then COVID-19 hit and the project had to be reimagined. But I had had such a brilliant time with Robbie up in the Highlands and the footage was so beautiful, the stunning landscape. So I decided to continue with the project and set the whole thing in rural Scotland. So hopefully, yeah, maybe one day we'll make the other version, who knows. I was interested in making a piece that resonates with different age groups, working on multiple levels. So for example, you can provide an experience that could be shared across generations. I really enjoyed planning for these different audiences and the way that we made the piece, you know, providing textures and imagery that resonates with different audiences. For example, in the piece, the children constantly bury me in various things. They start with stones, then I'm buried in snow, I'm buried in bark. And during the research period, we suggested to our young audiences that this could be about death, about the cycle of life. And they were horrified that us adults could see such sort of darkness. And they were convinced it was actually just very playful. They really saw the joy in it, a bit like how you might bury someone in sand at the beach or something. And that was such an interesting contrast. And so, yeah, I hope that through our openness and our honesty, that the work manages to be sincere and moving, but not sentimental or twee. And so far the work has toured to like one extended household at a time for up to about 12 people. And it's sort of played on the hour every hour. And this autumn, they will be taking out to schools and actually having up to 30 children sat inside the 4 screens. So yeah, it's really been an exciting piece for us in terms of its move to a more environmentally friendly practice, I should say. And also, obviously, for me as a mum, it's also really useful work in terms of, you know, the pressure that can come from having to tour internationally with this being a video installation. You know, it's a much less complex piece for me. And as audiences leave the screenings, they're given a QR code, and then that gives them access to a clip that encourages them to then make their own family portrait with family or friends. And they're given these kind of playful ideas inspired by the piece within that. So I'd like to finish up by showing you another little clip that explains more about the setup of family portrait.
So family portrait depicts what family life really feels like. It's a rather honest depiction of family life with its joys, but its relentlessness, its chaos. Audiences are given swivel stools so that they can choose which screen to follow and change direction as is when they want. That's quite fun. I think it sits between watching a film and a live performance. And it's really playfully edited between 4 screens. And I wanted to give an invitation to the audience to do their own edit as they watch. And it's this game between the screens that creates a lot of the comedy, but also makes you feel like you're in these landscapes with us. It's choreographed with my own children, and that makes for a very intimate choreography because obviously we know each other so well. Each one of them has a different relationship with me, and that's reflected in the way that we move together and the dances that we created. As well as the really choreographed performed aspects, there are aspects of the work that really shows an honesty and there's a realness to it. So you really get to know us as individuals and our relationship to each other. The intricate sound design is what pulls you in and takes you on this journey with us. We've created captions for deaf audiences and an audio description for blind audiences, and these are available at every performance.
At night, I get so scared. I run into my mum's room so fast she thinks I've broken a world record.
Within the audio description, I tried to keep the vocabulary simple so that it can be used by both adults and children. And the idea of the captions is that even if a child can't read it, they'll be with an adult who'd be able to interpret for them. The audience size really varies depending on the size of the space. So it can be quite big, but it could also be quite intimate. What I think is really useful is that the screenings could be attended by people with complex needs, and they could have a private screening just for their family unit or for a smaller group, so they felt safe.
The video installation can be supported by an art installation, where elements from nature have been gathered and placed inside bottles. This connects to the way that our family has discovered elements of nature on our journey.
At the end of the screenings, the audience is invited to discover what's inside these bottles.
Thanks, Natasha. And that's the end of the talky bit, if that's right. Yes. So it's over to you guys. As I said, the Q&A button is at the bottom. Those questions will be fed to Theatre Alibi, who'll be filtering them out towards us. And as Natasha and I were saying before, perhaps you just might want to send us your reaction, you know, just a single word in the chat or a sentence. I was just thinking the way I responded to it is as a mum, particularly that image of the children hanging off you, Natasha, and how it's both you're strong enough to carry them, but you have to walk through the world with these people kind of attached to you, and how much those embraces are about love. And particularly during lockdown, I remember feeling really grateful that I got hugs every day because of the children. The other thing that struck me as well was, I think it was when you were talking about it not being twee, or and yet also being quite profound. It really struck a beautiful balance for me between, this really is dance, it really is art, but it's so unintimidating. If I can see the skill because I've had a life in dance, but if I had never done any dance before, I would look at that and think, I could do that outside with my kids. And that for me is the total theatre of it, and the way it really does embrace everybody, the way you've put all these beautiful layers in place. Starts with the outdoors, and then the people, and then the music, and then the way it's presented live, and then the way it's transmitted through the access. Each one's very straightforward, but a bit like the bottles, they're all lined up so beautifully. That was the impression I got. Let's have a look. In the chat, Kathy is saying, I love the combination of recorded media and the live space. Can really see how these elements might work together. Beautiful. Yes, do you want to say anything more, Natasha, about that and the collaborators and how you found your way to those perfectly layered places? Because it must have been a journey, especially under lockdown.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I did have the concept of the 4 screens, so that actually what happens is most of the time one of the screens represents each one of us. So I have my screen, you know, etc. But of course it hadn't been tried and tested. So the first thing we had to do was try and get in a space to just test out this kind of concept. But trying to find a space during lockdown was nearly impossible. So we eventually found somewhere. Robbie wasn't able to travel because he's up in the Highlands. He wasn't able to come to Glasgow. So we just started and we projected it onto these 4 screens just to see if it even worked. And then with that information went back and, you know, filmed the rest with that knowledge of how we could then use the kind of edit. The edit itself, we ended up having 4 monitors to actually edit it with in the room. But I think really, yeah, the kind of combination of things came about by letting the kids really just be in those spaces and play. And it was trying to get the balance between us having our plans and our kind of more choreographic concepts or ideas, but really just responding to them being in those spaces and trying to make those 2 things, you know, come together, basically. Yeah, I think that's more or less, you know, how we achieved it. And then Davey, who did the sound, came actually did recordings, you know, with us on site wherever we were out, and then created the music as we went along as well. So it was quite a kind of, you know, organic process.
We've got a question coming in from Joe, I think, who says, firstly, beautiful. And there was some more question about the Joe, do you want to repeat it? It was about the format. Oh, here we go. There has been a lot of consideration given for the sharing. What was your process for this? Did you consult with special educational needs groups? Did you have the end presentation designed before you created it?
Like I said, I had the concept before I created it, this concept of 4 screens, audience on the inside, trying to make the landscapes quite immersive, that kind of idea. We, as a company, we've made work with children with complex needs. So I suppose I went into the process with that knowledge, but I've never actually tried and tested it in that context yet. But I suppose that kind of prior knowledge was useful for me in terms of trying to anticipate. And then since then I've had audiences who you know, for example, have autism, then I've asked them to give me, you know, feedback, like, you know, friends of mine and things. That's been really useful to try and understand a bit deeper. My neighbor is blind, and I asked her to come on board with me. She knows the kids, she knows, and that was, I think, quite useful to have that very personal approach. And she has, you know, audio description, for example, is quite, it can be quite personal. There are kind of guidance and rules, but it's actually not strict. You can actually create it as you want to. And so we decided to do it like with my voice, to make it as personal as possible and try to keep some of the humor. And, you know, that's very much her taste. She's a musician, and you know, her taste as a blind person is to try and retain, you know, that kind of the quirkiness and the humor, and not to make it too dry. So that's the approach, for example, that we went for with that. And yeah, the captioning, we just did it as we went along, really.
Yes, Natasha, you talked about this being the audience that you'd interacted with the least because of COVID, and you're curious to see what the audiences of more than 12, the audiences of 30 make of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're going to open in schools in October, so it'll be really exciting to see it in that context. But yeah, I haven't really observed audiences in the way that I do normally, which is why we actually eventually realized we really needed a test week. It was actually quite tricky because normally throughout a creative process, I invite audiences in throughout it, especially children, if it's, you know, for children. And that was actually kind of driving me a bit crazy, just to not have a chance to do that. And eventually it got to a point where things had, you know, relaxed a bit, and we put it up just like in the upstairs of a pub, actually, in Glasgow. And then we're able to invite families in, and at that point get children's reaction and ask them questions and sort of just test things out, really. Yeah.
That really, it's always struck me that your process is deeply collaborative, and to hear you talk about the audience there, it almost feels like you're a kind of a literally a conductor, you know, in terms of leadership of the process. You kind of like grab the lightning and make it and point it in different directions. Could you tell us a bit more about yourself as the leader or the instigator or the catalyst in the process? What image do you have of yourself, you know, within that?
I think each work is different. I do collaborate a lot. And I think what happens is when you start on a creative process, the process itself, the piece itself, at some point starts to dictate back to you what is needed. And it's about just staying in tune with that and letting that happen. Obviously, like I said, if it's for young people, then we take it out to schools, or take it out to, you know, if it's for preschool, those kind of spaces where we can just, you know, play and explore with the younger children. With this process, I actually worked with a number of artists. So Robbie Singh was really instrumental in making this piece with me. But I also worked briefly as well with Aya, who's another choreographer. So some of the footage was filmed in the south of Scotland, not in the Highlands. And she worked for my kind of outside eye in planning that part of it. And so that part of it actually touches more on the kind of motherhood side. So for example, we found an abandoned enamel bath, and there's a whole sequence that really shows that kind of sense of not being able to find that moment piece, you know, away from the kids, kind of thing. It represents that. So the kids are just there constantly playing while I'm trying to have this, you know, space. And so I think things like that came out because of the collaborations, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, lightning rod. That's the word I was looking for. Yes, I'll go to the chat and then back to the Q&A. We've got some things coming through. I love the I feel like the responding of presence while creating the work helps to create identity within the presence, especially in the way that the family portrait links with it. And something about being as a daughter. And then there's another lovely comment from, I saw a deeper perception of a mother and their role. Yes, I know Aya as a dancer, and she's become a mum quite recently as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just interested to not shy away, not just have this kind of Facebook version of a family, but actually to really show that, you know, amongst the joy and the love, there is this absolute relentlessness, this, you know, exhaustion, this, you know, lack of personal space. Well, the things, you know, it's not like it's like a whole negative thing, but it's definitely there. It's, you know, that that moment of trying to find space and not getting it. And like you said, like just carrying them all, again, that was kind of an image I was interested in terms of that sense of, yeah, you have responsibility for these beings, and that is at once a very beautiful but also, you know, demanding role.
Yeah. I saw very clearly, it's the moment in the trailer you're talking about your relationships with the three children. You said I have very different relationships with the three of them, and I thought how clearly that was evidenced through touch. And is that something only dance can do?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a very clear way that I would duet with each of my children and how it would be different, you know, based on our relationship and on their personalities, and also how much they like being in front of the camera, for example. So one of them actually finds, you know, he's much shyer. He doesn't want to be the center of attention, and he had written this story that was all about his fears and was very honest, and it was about his fears and about his, you know, the sense of pressure of being the oldest and having to try and be, you know, the bold one for his brother and sister. And we decided to incorporate that into the show because it was so perfect for us, you know. But then that meant we had to film footage to kind of go alongside it, and that meant him being center of attention. He found that quite tricky, you know, and I had to kind of keep coming back into it a sense, or send his brother in, you know, and things like that. Just kind of, yeah, it was an interesting process for us. Whereas the other two were loving it.
and what do they think about its warm reception that it's had?
Well, I was really pleased that that son who did struggle the most, like he then said to me when he watched it, he said, "Oh, Mom, it was worth it." So I was chuffed that he said that. Yeah, I was really pleased.
Oh, beautiful. And there's another lovely comment on the same lines here from Philida. I love the personal approach. It feels so intimate and fun. And you've mentioned fun and humor a lot, and I kind of, yeah, I love that idea of this lightness. Kathy's got a really rich question here. Do you see the piece as speaking about the often perceived whiteness of rural landscapes, or is that incidental to it? Obviously, it's your actual family, not casting. Maybe that's a kind of, would you have done differently if it hadn't been locked down and you'd have only been working together?
No, I mean, I am aware of the kind of, I suppose, like it's inherently political in some way, partly because I'm a single parent and partly because, yeah, my children are not white in rural Scotland. I think there is a bit of a statement about that because you don't encounter, you know, I don't know, like there's a lot of, yeah, I don't know. So I was definitely aware of it. And I think that made me, you know, feel like it was a really important choice for us to make, actually, and to really almost instill in my own children that sense of ownership and belonging, and that they are Scottish, they can be, you know, those landscapes belong to them as well, if you know what I mean.
Yes, well, you're talking to a Celt here who, like, you know, as a mixed heritage person, ran through the heather and loved the outdoors and loved the sea. And actually, yes, there weren't many images for me, myself, when I was their age, of seeing people like me doing that. I don't think it affected my enjoyment or right to claim it anymore. But yes, it does resonate, and it is important. And I'm often of the belief that sometimes simply by our presence as people of color, as global majority people, that just to be there is enough. That says enough without having to go into the spoken or written detail of kind of why we're there and what the political point is. That we're powerful sort of simply being there, you know, as ourselves, and showing that family relationship as well. And many families in rural and urban areas, of course, will look like that now. I'd be really interested to know if urban families respond differently from rural families, or is that something that that is to be seen?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've already started conversations as well with, you know, other countries where they have none of that kind of landscape, you know, and they're really intrigued for their own children to have exposure to that. You know, we are so sort of spoiled here in Scotland, you know, in terms of the landscapes that we have around us. So yeah, again, I don't know yet. It's too early in the kind of touring, you know, of the piece to know that, because it's only really been shown in the Central Belt in Scotland so far.
Yeah, because talking about environment and young people, there's still lots of people have fallen back in love with the outdoors over lockdown. So it's like the zeitgeist, it's very much with you. And of course, there's lots about young people and well-being and outdoors, and there's a great tradition of making sure that if you've grown up in an urban area, you go and have an experience outdoors as well. There is a lovely comment about access here. The it's Joe again, the swivel chairs and permission of a moving space makes it so accessible too. Yes, I was struck by the little girl twirling, and that I've seen this many times, that young people, they will respond in movement to the movement they see because it's young people's first language. And when you have teachers or parents saying sit still in a theatre, sometimes it means that they're not able to give you that feedback, that physical feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of the, the positives that came out of having these screenings where it was, just one extended household at a time, because people felt much freer to behave however they want in the space. So we had, for example, toddlers sometimes running around the outside because those projectors, you can see them from both sides. And so there was like a sort of physical response as the projections travel, the children would sometimes travel too, kind of thing. And then, like you say, dance, on the lively bits of music. And I think I'm really glad we went with that choice in terms of the swivel chairs, definitely.
Yeah. My son would have been one of those to run round and round. He has some neurodiversity anyway, but every space he goes into, he makes his own pathway through it and describes it. And I've seen that with 2-3-year-olds. They also make the space their own. It's beautiful, and that's great. You have that opportunity to both take it in and respond. We have another question. How does the interplay between your artistic wants and the reading of the needs of your children impact the process? Were they involved in the edit as well as the filming? Did anything get a no from them?
Well, I was aware that I needed to show them the footage to sort of okay it before it went public, but they weren't sort of, intricately involved in the edit. But I did want them to have a chance to see it before anyone else, if you know what I mean. That did feel important because, they are very honest. And actually, some other kids, when they see it, they're like, wow, that was really honest. And it's, the fact that Otis owns up to all these fears, him, and he's scared of, literally, he lists fears of being everything, from darkness to being alone to Pingu, you know what I mean? It's like his list of fears are quite extreme, So I think that, the screening's actually planning to go into their school soon. And I think he's the only one who's a little bit like, oh, I wonder if that's going to be a bit embarrassing for me, because he's now like in like the final year of primary school, and it's like, you're supposed to be the big kids. So we'll see, obviously they should be involved in those kind of decisions. And in terms of the making itself, I think they sort of naturally edit anyway, don't they? They sort of do what's interesting to them, and they share with you what they're willing to share, and and move in a way that's inherently theirs and honest to them. So I think in terms of the honesty, we don't have to worry about that, because it's in the process itself. They just won't do it. You can't force children to do those, you know what I mean? They've never been to like actual dance classes, for example. It's not like the movement vocabulary is coming, from a kind of outside eye, in a sense. So
that's part of what struck me, is it all looks so doable, and they look like this is what kids would do if they saw a branch. If they were out, they would jump over it, they would roll under it. They wouldn't think pirouette, jete, end in arabesque. And I think that in order to make it accessible for those family audiences who try out the ideas afterwards, that's what I can see. That's interesting. I've never taken mine to formal dance classes. They've just worked with the likes of Liz Clark and turned on its head, because I was kind of squashed into a tutu far too early, and kind of just want them to find their own way. But I do think it's very interesting in the era of Facebook, where our children's images have never had so much possibility of them being shared, that they have a say in those images too before they're 18. To me, that feels quite important.
I mean, ironically, I'm one of those mums who never puts photos of my kids online and then I make these works. But it feels very different, because for me that actually is enriching their life. You know, there's things that from that experience that for them personally, but also for us as a family, that, you know, I believe for us is actually useful. Also, I have to be creative as an artist and as a mother. I have to be creative with the ways that, you know, we function, so that we actually are connected, if you know what I mean. Like by connecting with my artistic practice, it feels like one of the ways that we communicate and that we are solid.
Yeah, mine can sometimes feel jealous of dance because it's work. It's something that takes mummy away, so that when we do things together, that's an important part of showing that you can spend time. But like you were saying, it's very important that you've had their endorsement as well to do as you're doing artistically. And there is something, well, it connects into what we've just been saying from Nikki. You talk about the subject matter with such honesty. I'm interested to understand how your sense of performing for an audience that includes children shapes the work or doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite interesting because early on in this process, in the original plan to do work with artists internationally and connect with the international tour, I realized that the venues and the partners would be venues that we were booked through making work for children and young people. And so, you know, it was an obvious choice that the audience for this should be families or, you know, across generations, a bit like having PG, if you know what I mean. So rather than making work specifically for a child, I would say this work is made really in mind with an access for all ages, in a sense. I mean, as much as you can achieve that, you know. I think with dance, it's different to making theatre, where in theatre you have to be very conscious of the language that you use, because it has to be, you know, the right vocabulary that's appropriate for a specific age group, but also not talk down, you know. Whereas I think with dance and this non-verbal communication, I think it's much easier to achieve that, or at least attempt that, I would say. And I really enjoy the fact that different ages can watch it together and you can share it, you know, amongst. So sometimes we have screenings where it's just a group of much older audiences coming together with their friends, or, you know, sometimes it's across generations, sometimes, you know, just parents and young kids. So I think for me, yeah, it was just that consciousness, like I was trying to explain with the idea of the burials, that like adults will read it in a certain way, but children will read it very differently. And I think, you know, just the knowledge that I kind of have of children through being a parent, but also just through making work, you know, you can kind of predict that to an extent, that they will respond in their way. And actually you just need to turn off your sort of adult eyes in a way and try to read it. Do you know what I mean? So that you have that understanding.
Absolutely. It was a question I used to loathe as an artist. Who's your work for? It's like, well, it's for everybody. But that was a very powerful way that you explained it. It's a bit like PG. And I think more and more again after 2020 and many of the things that have happened to us over the last year, we're understanding that there can be multiple points of view of one thing, and that's fine. I think we're only just getting there in lots of ways. I wonder if this might be a great moment to talk about your backstory and understory, Natasha, about how you arrived at this way of working, say from where you began in dance or theatre or movement, and the journey you went on, because you didn't set out to particularly to make work for young audiences, or perhaps even to be a mother maker, but you allowed it to happen and allowed it to grow. And I'd love perhaps certainly I know we have at least one student here. Could you tell us the backstory?
Yeah, well, I was a dance artist. I moved into choreography, but really what happened was I kind of fell into making work for young people almost by mistake. So what happened was I was really interested to make a piece that told the same story twice, and once was from the perspective of the parents, and then the same story, same set, same cast, I wanted to retell from the perspective of the daughter, and one would be for a child audience, sort of 7+, and one would be for an adult audience. And I worked with a playwright at the time called Robert Allen Evans, and it's not because the work has words in it as such, but it's because he's really good at, you know, understanding the dramaturgy. And he said to me, but if work's really good, children's work, then adults will enjoy it. So we don't need two versions. But for me, that was really the starting point of the intrigue, the whole starting point of this process, this research that I wanted to sort of go through. And I think I was interested in what is interesting or sort of uniquely interesting to adults that isn't necessarily on a child's radar. So for example, we did end up making these two versions. In the adult version, you can see, for example, the breakdown of the parents' sexual relationship, you know, things that aren't really relevant to a child. And so in the end, it worked. Yeah, it worked that we did tour these two works, so venues could book both, and they're very different audiences. Some venues would just book one if it was like a children's festival. And then obviously from the back of that, what happened was I got other commissions for making children's work, because I think people were like, oh, there's a sense that I could understand, you know, child mentality. And so then other commissions sort of came in, and it just really built from there. So I think as a choreographer, though, it's been an amazing process, because it opened a very different world to me, you know, to actually take work out that tours to children's theatres or children's festivals alongside, you know, dance festivals. They're very different, and it's a very different sector, and it's actually a really exciting, brilliant sector to be part of. So I think it's actually been an amazing process. And in terms of film, I've always been interested in dance film. I've made a number of short dance films. So I think that process of making, you know, dance for camera and then combining the two, this idea of video installation, was something I'd been wanting to do for a long time. And one of the reasons was because I think, like I said, as a mum, to tour video installation work, you know, means I don't necessarily have to go out on the road all the time and, you know, rehearse, tech works, space works, all those things that come from being a choreographer, director. Then yeah, so it was the intrigue, but also I suppose in a way, there's so much, those video installations, the videos, it can offer so much. There's so many ways of playing with it. You know, as I was saying, you can see it from both sides. And already I'm starting to think about other ways that we could use these, you know, amazing, yeah, projectors and screens, and, you know, how you can make it performance-like.
Great. So that brings us on to the piece's future. Where's it all going next, Natasha? And it sounds like there were these great realizations, some of which sort of happened because of the restrictions of COVID, but have tripped, you know, new thoughts about what happens next. So
yeah, I mean, there's been quite a lot of interest. So we're definitely looking at what's interesting about this is that we can take it out to international venues without even one of us going. So if it's somewhere that's able to build the set themselves, they can build their own version of it, you know, source their own materials. The stalls, for example, are basically just IKEA stalls, and then, you know, we put on kind of casters, rotating casters. So it's things that are really achievable anywhere can recreate this. And I think that's actually, yeah, I mean, amazing, you know. So that is basically what will happen. If it's in the UK, we'll tour our, you know, set and our version, but in other places, there's a way that we can work very differently. Yeah.
great. Well, we're coming close to the end now. So I've got a comment from Nikki. Thank you. There is a real liberation to working without words. I love language, but was struck by the areas that opened up when I worked on my only non-verbal piece. And yes, here's to multi-layered work that holds meaning in varying ways for all sorts of people. Is there anything, do you want to respond to that one? And there's another one coming in.
Yeah, I think I'm also really intrigued by that, you know, this idea that we can communicate on multiple levels, and it makes, I suppose it is ultimately, you know, what was great coming out of this period of lockdown where we had to cancel all our tours, cancel. You realize that what you're craving as an artist is this way of just sharing with people, you know, communicating with people. And suddenly we were in a position to do that again. And it was just so thrilling, like, to feel like we were able to, yeah, in a way that felt safe, you know, for venues, for, you know, starting to attract audiences back that might be nervous. This particular installation, you know, version of a piece meant that that relationship could start to build up again. And it was just, yeah, you just realize as an artist what, you know, what this lockdown period has kind of made us miss out on, and this communication. And this multi-layered way of, you know, holding meaning and communicating with different people is exactly what it is that I suppose we're doing. Why else would we do it, kind of thing? And it was, yeah, an amazing feeling for us to get back out there in a way.
I have another comment from the chat. Love your honesty and openness, Natasha. Brilliant webinar. Thank you. Liberation is the word.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, it's been really great connecting with nature in that way. Like you say, lockdown was that period that we all realized, I suppose, what's important. And actually, it was quite a relief in a way to not be just constantly touring, constantly making work. There was something very brilliant about that. And connecting with family and connecting with nature. And I suppose this work is really just of that time and has come out as a result of that.
And from Jo, we have really been inspired by the input of the child in the process of creation. This is something that is really developing in my work, and I would love to find out more of your work. It's got more about your work. It's got my brain moving. Well, is the destination to find out more about your work Barrowland Ballet's website?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And there are some of our works, like we made a film called Strings, for example, where we worked with children with complex needs, and the piece is all centered around them and their, you know, it's like improvisations that the children have set up and we respond to and things like that. So there are certainly some of my work that is definitely more down that, you know, that path.
Yeah, and Strings is a film, is that?
Yeah.
There is a filmed version of it, but you keep it and you show it exclusively. I remember Strings. For me, Strings is just the most beautiful example of professionals and profound people with profound and multiple learning disabilities working together harmoniously, respectfully, deep skills, but just gorgeous to watch. We're getting the thank yous and the fascinating and inspiring flooding in now. Fascinating and inspiring thank you from Rachel. Big thank you from Jo Cohn, Barrowland Ballet's website. And Jo, hi everyone, you can find out more at Barrowland Ballet. Is that your producer? Yeah, being a good producer, and to email Jo at Barrowland Ballet if there's anything specifically you'd like to hear more about. And there will be some follow-up information for anybody who logged on today. There'll be an email sent with links to the films that we saw, so you can watch them again and enjoy the non-broadcast quality. There are links about the access, connection to Barrowland and to Natasha's work. And there will be an interactive Padlet, if perhaps the link comes into the chat for that next, where you can continue the conversation, you can continue asking questions, and Theatre Alibi will make sure that those reach Barrowland Ballet, and that hopefully the dialogue will continue just a little bit further with Natasha. You can share contact details, your thoughts and provocations, and rewatch all the videos that Natasha shared today, and the Padlet link is in there. So we're beginning to wind up. So I have to say, any last questions or anything else you wanted to say about the work, Natasha, that we haven't asked about or that you felt very strongly about? It was
good.
We spoke about the potential about projection. That was something that really struck you in this piece, but I don't know if there's something different has come out from our conversation today.
Yeah, I suppose it's something I've kind of dabbled with, like in Whiteout, for example. There we use projection within the live performance, also as a way of making work with children. I think projections are really useful for that, because you know, it's just not really practical to be able to tour with, you know, people of all different ages and things like that. So I think it is a really brilliant way to facilitate that in terms of, you know, intergenerational casts, for example. It's a really useful medium for that. And also, like, you don't have to make the kids rehearse over and over again in that way. That's not really going to be, you know, fun for anyone. It's important that it remains, you know, playful and interesting and engaging for people of all ages in the process.
Yes, I feel that very strongly about film. You get to capture people at their best. And sometimes, particularly profoundly disabled people, they might only have a couple of moments that are good for them during that session, but you get to capture that, and film keeps it forever. And of course, we have so many mediums for sharing film now, from our phones to this medium now to cinema screens, to, as you say, you know, just get something on casters from IKEA and project against it. It reminds me of early days of the excitement of, I don't know if anybody out here remembers Cinefilm, when you had Cinefilm just projected on the door. It's kind of, film now has that. It used to be this big cumbersome thing, you know, say in the 70s and 80s, it was epics and Jaws and Star Wars. Now anybody can do it. It's incredibly accessible.
Yeah, exactly. We just did a dance for camera workshop at a school where we got the children to also be the camera people. We just took like iPhone 12s. The cameras are amazing. You know, there's so much you can do, and you can download an app to actually make it into a really sort of, got all the things that a camera can offer in terms of like white balance and, you know, simple things like that. And it's just an amazing, yeah, you know, obviously they're better than us because they're younger.
Yeah, I was about to say, many people I know who've been working online and with film, the young people are so on it with the technology, just like we were talking about people responding in movement to movement. Young people are responding back, talking back, giving feedback, giving art back to people online, and then perhaps older makers are able to shape that, so there's yet another form of interaction. So maybe the kids will just text you next time, or just film themselves and say, mum, deal with this. But it's been a wonderful conversation and a wonderful trip through so many things, you know, environment, your backstory, the relationship with the children, but your relationship with the landscape and the art and with Scotland, and to what the zeitgeist, what is happening now. It feels both ancient, perhaps because of the landscape and those internal things, but the way that you've packaged it up and it's being shared, it's incredibly now. And I really wish it that wide audience. I wish you loads of interesting feedback, and I really hope I get to see it where I'm based in the Midlands. I think it's time to wind up and say goodbye. So just to say, those of you that have been watching today, there is a feedback form, and I think Theatre Alibi are able to put that in the chat. I used to be a terrible filler in of feedback forms and surveys until I sent one out myself. And I don't know if, again, under lockdown, that notion of being able to be found, of sending your feedback, of having your say, has become more and more important to us. So if you can possibly do it, I think do send that feedback. But it sounds like when you visit Natasha's show, the ways of feedback are multiple. You can move, you can go and look at the bottles, and families get a follow-up pack, don't they, which we're going to put the link in the chat for. Do you want to tell us?
So they get like a little QR code as they leave, and it just connects to a video. Just the idea of trying to just inspire and, you know, have something playful to take away with you, and make your own portrait with your friends or your family, basically. Yeah.
Great. And I hope I get that too as the host, because I definitely want to take my two would love that. They would
look forward to seeing it
into that. Yeah. And maybe I'll film it and share it. So that brings us to the end of today's Getting Through the Cracks. I hope lots has got through the cracks, lots of light and fun and inspiration. It certainly has come through to me. And to tell you about the next session of getting through the cracks, we will be with on Thursday the 28th of October, Justin Audibert, if I'm saying that right, from freelance director and artistic director of Unicorn Theatre, and that will be facilitated by Nikki, who's on this call from Theatre Alibi. Justin will be talking about Unicorn's production of Anansi the Spider. And I think it just remains for me to thank Natasha thank you guys who've shown up live to say thank you, and do connect to those of you who are watching on the recording. And we're going to turn our cameras off now and wish you the very best for the rest of your day. Thanks Theatre Alibi, thank you Barrowland, and thank you backup team from Theatre Alibi, Pilar, Nikki, and everybody in the company. Thanks then, bye.